Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. He came, he saw, he ranted. US President Donald Trump's address at the United Nations General Assembly is making global headlines, but not for reasons that would please him. It was an hour-long address which critics have described as a meandering speech, an unhinged rant, and an embarrassment to America. The predominant themes were very generous self-praise, scathing criticism of the United Nations, and some very controversial remarks on a whole host of global issues. Well, many would argue that the president was rather economical with the truth. And media houses in the US and around the world have been busy fact-checking Donald Trump. Not known for his modesty, Trump gave himself credit for the millionth time for ending 7 wars, including, it seems, some imaginary ones. Once again, he claimed credit for ending the conflict between India and Pakistan, a claim roundly rejected and debunked by India on innumerable occasions. And the president then went on to claim, surprise, surprise, that everyone thinks he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, so grand are his accomplishments as a global peacemaker. Once again, Trump trained his guns on India as he accused both India and China of being the primary funders of Russia's war in Ukraine. Of course, India is the country that the US president has singled out in recent months for steep punitive tariffs for its purchase of Russian oil. It's another matter that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is the one now fact-checking Trump on this. Zelensky has publicly disputed Trump's claim, stating that India is mostly supportive of Ukraine despite some energy-related challenges, and that Europe must build stronger ties with New Delhi and pull it into their fold rather than pushing it away. Trump then described the United States as entering a golden age under his great leadership, claiming how life for Americans has never been better and inflation has been defeated. Of course, the facts point to the contrary, but that doesn't really seem to matter. Trump labelled climate change as the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. He slammed European countries for their renewable energy policies. In fact, he accused his European allies of inviting illegal aliens through open borders and pushing suicidal green energy policies. He warned that these policies would lead to Europe's decline as they threaten, in his view, the economic and cultural fabric of the continent. Throughout his speech, Trump rejected multilateralism, emphasizing on a nationalist approach to global crises. Many have said it sounded like a political rally speech pandering to his MAGA support base rather than one addressing world leaders. Believe it or not, Trump told the gathered world leaders, "Your countries are going to hell." This as he railed against immigration and lax border controls and patted his own back for taking tough action against immigrants across the United States. Well, if you thought that was bad, let me tell you, Trump's most stinging criticism was reserved for the very institution that he was addressing, the United Nations. He called the UN an ineffectual institution, questioned its relevance and purpose, and accused it of issuing empty statements without backing them up with real action. Trump attacked the UN for its aid programs, claiming that instead of preventing invasions, it was creating and financing them through its support to asylum seekers. Remember, under his administration, the US has significantly reduced funding to the United Nations, impacting its humanitarian efforts worldwide. And it gets worse. Trump even roasted the UN over some technical glitches that he experienced, including a broken escalator and teleprompter. He described these as intentional attempts to humiliate him. The White House has since launched an investigation into the escalator malfunction. The right wing on social media is having a field day, floating conspiracy theories, with many calling it a deliberate act of sabotage, and some MAGA megaphones going as far as to say they can smell an assassination attempt on their beloved president. Unlike in previous years, Trump's speech drew silence rather than laughter from the UN General Assembly. Perhaps a good indicator of just how wary, even scared, the world is of the mercurial and unpredictable US president and the disruptive and destructive policies he's unleashed since he began his second term in office this January. With practically every move of his, from aggressive trade wars to the constant flip-flops on global conflicts, Trump has thrown the international order as we know it into turmoil and complete chaos, leaving everyone on tenterhooks and wondering with trepidation what Donald Trump might do next.
It's too bad that I had to do these things instead of the United Nations doing them. And sadly, in all cases, the United Nations did not even try to help in any of them. I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the 2 things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Thank you very much. And by the way, it's working now. It just went on. Thank you. That being the case, what is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action. Not only is the UN not solving the problems it should, too often, it's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the #1 political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders. In 2024, the UN budgeted $372 million in cash assistance to support an estimated 624,000 migrants journeying into the United States. Then they said global warming will kill the world, but then it started getting cooler, so now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change, because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products, which, as you know, I found out about 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't happy. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves. Who the hell ever heard of that one? Not only is the UN not solving the problems it should, too often, it's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the #1 political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. As a result, every air conditioner is like very uncommon to see one in some of these countries because the electric costs are so high. So while the U.S. has approximately 1,300 heat-related deaths annually, that's a lot, Europe loses more than 175,000 people to heat deaths each year because the costs are so expensive you can't turn on an air conditioner. What is that all about? That's not Europe. That's not the Europe that I love and know. All in the name of pretending to stop the global warming hoax. the entire globalist concept of asking successful industrialized nations to inflict pain on themselves and radically disrupt their entire societies must be rejected completely and totally, and it must be immediate. That's why in America I withdrew from the fake Paris Climate Accord, where, by the way, America was paying so much more than every country. Others weren't paying. China didn't have to pay until 2030. Russia was given an old standard that was easy to meet, a 1990 standard. But for the United States, we're supposed to pay like $1 trillion. And I said, this is another scam. The fact is, the United States has been taken advantage of by the world for many, many years, but not any longer, as you probably noticed. I unleashed massive energy production and signed historic executive orders to hunt for oil, but we don't have to do much hunting because we have the most oil of any nation anywhere, oil and gas in the world. And if you add coal, we have the most of any nation in the world. Clean, I call it clean, beautiful coal. You can do things today with coal that you couldn't have done 10 years ago, 15 years. So I have a little standing order in the White House. Never use the word coal, only use the words clean, beautiful coal. Sounds much better, doesn't it? Now, after ending all of these wars and also earlier negotiating the Abraham Accords, which is a very big thing for which our country received no credit, never receives credit. Everyone says that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize for each one of these achievements. But for me, the real prize will be the sons and daughters who live to grow up with their mothers and fathers, because millions of people are no longer being killed in endless and...
All right. Let's introduce our guests on Global Pulse tonight. We're joined by Brad Bannon, political commentator. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Don Ritter, former Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives, is also with us. And completing the panel tonight is Ambassador Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States. Very warm welcome to all my guests. Brad Bannon, if I could begin with you. To just take some of the excerpts from Trump's 1 hour long address at the UN General Assembly. Life for Americans has never been better. We've defeated inflation. The US is entering a golden age under my leadership. He tells world leaders, especially European, your countries are going to hell thanks to immigration. Climate change is the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. Air conditioning is not working. With its immigration and green energy policies, Europe will see its decline. India and China are the main funders of Russia's war, even if Zelensky disagrees. I ended 7 wars, including India-Pakistan. I deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. That's what everyone says. The UN is an irrelevant, useless, ineffectual institution, and their bad escalators and bad teleprompters are all I've got from the United Nations. Maybe it was sabotage. MAGA even says it was possibly an assassination attempt on the president. I don't know where to begin. So I'd like you to share with our viewers your thoughts on what you heard the US president say.
I was going to steal your line. I don't know where to begin. That was the most embarrassing speech that a United States president has ever given to an international forum. The president spent most of his hour whining about his lack of recognition for solving wars, stopping wars that he'd had no role in stopping. His attack on immigration, my great-grandparents were immigrants to the United States. Immigrants have made the United States a great country. My great-grandparents came here from Ireland, the Bannons, and from Quebec and Canada, the LeCounts. And my great-grandparents and millions of others like them made this a great nation. And for him to dismiss immigration like that is offensive. It certainly is to my family and millions of other American families. We live in an increasingly dangerous world. And that address yesterday by the president is going to leave us without friends, is going to leave the United States without friends in a very dangerous world. Uh, then there's the question of climate change. He called it a con. Just about every reputable scientist in the world believes that the Earth, the planet, is under threat from global warming. And, that wasn't a speech to the United Nations. That wasn't even a speech to all Americans. That was a speech to his rabid supporters here in the United States. He doesn't care about world public opinion, as you can see from that speech yesterday. All he cares about is what his supporters here in the United States think. And there are declining numbers of those every time he gives an embarrassing speech like that. Now, I want to go back to his claim to stop wars. During his campaign for re-election in 2024, he often said that he could solve the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Well, he's had 24 hours. He's had 8 months, in fact, and the war in Ukraine is as intense and deadly as it ever was. Then there's the war in Gaza. His blind support of Israel has resulted in the death of hundreds, at least 100,000 civilians, many of them women and children, and he's done nothing to stop it except to supply Israel with the bombs they're using to kill these women and children. And again, as an American, I was embarrassed.
As an American, you felt embarrassed. Very strong words from Brad Bannon there. Don Ritter, come in here. You heard Brad there saying this was embarrassing for Americans. President Trump seemed to be pandering to his MAGA support base at home rather than addressing world leaders who had gathered at the UN General Assembly. Some of the statements that he made were not just economical with the truth, but many of them sounded bizarre. And according to Brad and many others, what Trump is doing is to increasingly isolate the United States, and he may drive it to a situation where the US, supposedly the most powerful country in the world, is left with practically no friends, given the rate at which Donald Trump is going after one country after another.
Hi. I would beg to differ with Brad Bannon. I think that speech was the unvarnished truth to a UN bureaucracy that has been living off the fat of the land and doing nothing but passing resolutions against Israel for the past decades. Now, let's just start with something interesting for India. India and China are financing the war against Ukraine, period. Now, I don't blame China because they're on the other side of the divide of freedom and democracy and totalitarian, authoritarian rule. But India doesn't have to do this. It's not necessary. We could make deals with India. Other countries could make deals with India. So for a few bucks on a barrel, India spends billions and billions of dollars for the Russian war machine to continue. Now, let's just go on to borders and legal immigration. Illegal immigration, Brad, not what your parents.
Immigration.
No,
and my great-grandparents were immigrants, and I'm embarrassed for the president for insulting my ancestors.
You had your time.
And he promised to
You
solve the
had your
Ukraine war
time,
in
Brad.
24 hours. And it's been 8 months and it's just got
If
worse.
you give me a chance,
American bombs are killing Gazan
Okay.
women and children.
you know, Brad, you're
Okay.
not obeying
Don,
the
go
rules.
ahead. Complete your point.
Okay. Mass migration is killing Europe. 12 major cities in London have Muslim
Yep. And then there's the
and they are
anti-Muslim creed
promoting,
too.
some of them are promoting Sharia
And
law,
some of them are very good people.
and some of them are terrible mayors. But the bottom line is not that they're good or bad people.
Why
Well,
did Trump break his promise to solve the Ukraine war in 24
okay,
hours?
are we going to have rules here, or
Okay.
is he going to?
Okay. Don, complete your point.
I
I
didn't
just want
interrupt
to
his
point out to you that Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has just today said in an interview that he believes that Donald Trump is a racist, sexist, misogynist, and Islamophobe.
Yes. Well, let me go back to mass migration because I want to cover the larger issues that are at stake here. Europe is being ruined by mass migration of Muslims who are not
And the
assimilated.
United States is being helped by the immigrants who have
Are you
always
going to
made
stop
this
him
country
or
great.
what? Am I going to have a chance to finish my speech?
And it's
Okay, Don,
of
please do
immigrants.
complete your point because then I need to go to the Indian guest as well. Complete your point, Don.
Well, he spoke for upwards of 5 minutes, and I have spoken for 2 before he continues to interrupt me. Mass
Okay, go on.
migration has hurt the countries of France, of Germany, of Great Britain, as Muslims who don't assimilate
There's
are
the
having
Muslim
more
thing
and
again.
more influence on the population, on
Racial
the voting
hatred.
patterns, and Europe is losing its identity. Okay, let's go to climate change. I've studied climate change as a MIT engineering doctorate, and back in Congress, I had the first hearing on climate change. Climate change is I don't know if I would call it a hoax, but it's simply the
Yeah, there it
alarmist.
goes. Racial hatred again.
Oh.
That is the essence of Donald Trump's
Okay,
presidency.
you know,
but
I'm gonna hang
Don,
up.
the
If you
air
want, I will
conditioning
hang up.
doesn't work. Is that
If
what
you
is
want,
causing global warming, Don? The air conditioning does not work in Europe? What does that even mean?
excuse me, I didn't get that. I'm trying
That
to
is
tell
something
you
that
my
Donald
view
Trump
of
has said.
global warming. The alarmist view is wrong. There is no existential threat. The existential threat comes from the policies to address global warming, which are denuding the Western civilization of fossil fuels and weakening their societies tremendously, creating electricity prices like they've never seen before. Okay,
Okay,
let's go
very quickly,
to
Don.
let's go to Ukraine. President Trump, and I didn't agree with his position on Ukraine for the longest time, but yesterday we saw a kind of sea change in his position, saying that Europe could shoot down Russian planes if they violated NATO airspace. He said that. He also said that things are going to change with regard to supply of NATO with weapons, which they will pay for, and supply Ukraine. And he even talked about, I don't know if I believe this, but the Ukraine could conceivably win back all of its lands. Now, what his speech was to the UN was hard truth to a bunch of bureaucrats who are sucking hind you know what for decades, as they don't pay their parking tickets in New York City. And
Okay.
what have they done? What has the UN done in the last 30, 40 years? UNRWA, UNRWA, has been a tool, a mechanism of Hamas, a
Okay.
great
Okay.
terrorist
We've heard you,
movement.
Don. We've heard you. you have your opinion, others have theirs. This is
Well,
something that we
glad you
can
gave
debate
me an
till the cows come
opportunity to
home.
speak.
Okay, we've heard you.
I'm
We've heard
glad
you,
you
Don.
gave me the
We've heard
opportunity
you.
to
You've
speak
addressed.
without
You've addressed
interruption.
every major point. You've addressed every major point that was made by President Trump in his speech. I just want to point out a few things before I go on to my next guest. Climate change, I don't know where to begin because I think we're all facing the brunt of it. It's a reality, whether anyone likes to admit it or not. The point that Brad and many others are making is that Donald Trump claims to have ended 7 wars and says he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He keeps talking about India and Pakistan. One, India does not accept that the ceasefire with Pakistan had anything to do with Donald Trump. He's talked about wars between countries that did not even exist. And he claimed that within 24 hours he would end the Russia Ukraine conflict. It's been 8 months, he hasn't managed to do that. And for a man who's claiming a Nobel Peace Prize, it's quite rich that he continues to offer unqualified support to Israel, which continues to bomb Gaza every single day, and where more than 60,000 civilians, including women and children, have been killed. Also, you said, and the President says India and China are the main funders of Russia's war. Well, let me tell you, even President Zelensky disagrees. Today, the man fact-checking Donald Trump on that claim is President Zelensky himself, who has said, no, India is mostly on our side. We've had some issues with them on the question of energy, though that can be managed. Europe needs to build stronger ties with India, not push it away. Okay, let me now bring in Ambassador Meera Shankar, who has
By
very
the way,
patiently listened
are you a
to the
moderator
two.
or are you
Okay,
a
we have to
participant?
go. We have to go on to our other guest, and I will come back to you, Don. Both of you have had your say. Ambassador Meera Shankar has been listening impatiently to the two American perspectives on this. Ambassador Shankar, your thoughts on the speech that we heard. Critics, of course, have called it not just a meandering speech, but an unhinged rant by Donald Trump, pandering to his MAGA support base rather than an address to world leaders. How did you look at it?
Look, I think that, with the breaking down of the teleprompter, this was more of a stream of consciousness kind of address, rambling and touching all the tropes which are, the recurring themes as far as President Trump is concerned, both domestically and externally. Now, we can see that he thinks that immigration is the biggest problem confronting the world, and that it is undermining uh, Western civilization, and it won't survive unless they actually seal their borders from people they don't know. Now, looking at it from a distance from India, there does appear to be an undercurrent of racism with regard to immigration, because while, brown immigration is threatening, uh, white South Africans are actually being given political asylum and encouraged to come. So, different norms for people of different color. So, looking at it from here, it does appear that there is an element of racism. Now, most of the Indians who have migrated to the US have been on the basis of uh, competitive talent. They've studied in the US. They have, through the meritocracy, contributed to the US's economic growth and prosperity, being responsible for many startups in the whole Silicon Valley ecosystem. But yet, I see that there is a lot of anger targeted against the Indian American community today and against Indian immigrants. We see that reflected in the H-1B visa decision, where the fee has been raised to $100,000 per person who gets the visa, and that effectively guts the program. The US had pledged 65,000 annual movement of natural persons under Mode 4 uh, within the General Agreement on Trade and Services in the WTO. So it could be in violation of the WTO. Now, apart from immigration, and here the interesting thing is that Trump calls out to Europe, basically saying that, Europe has to follow the US lead in taking very forceful action to deport immigrants and to, preserve their culture. And this is also a kind of a push for right-wing movements in Europe, which many of the European countries have been battling, and their key issue is immigration. Now, I do take it that it is difficult for countries to assimilate large numbers of immigrants who come in, especially if there is, they are distinct, they don't kind of merge in. But this has been, an issue uh, in Europe for some time. And Europe has also been tightening the gateways for immigration. But the question is, the more that Western policies contribute to chaos and destabilization in developing countries in the Middle East and Africa, the more the consequences of that will be faced by them in terms of this stream of humanity, which then
Okay.
wants to escape the conditions which have been created. So, it's a kind of a full circle. And as far as Muslim immigration is concerned, let's not forget a lot of it was encouraged when the US was pursuing a kind of jihad via Pakistan in Afghanistan, and a lot of the Muslim immigration took place then, or has been the consequences of the wars in Afghanistan or Iraq. A lot of the
Absolutely. And let's not
who went
forget that Donald Trump continues to court and woo a terrorist nation like Pakistan even today. Fating their army chief Asim Munir, treating him as a state guest at the White House, knowing fully well that this is a country that has been exporting terror around the world, not just to India, knowing fully well that it is in Pakistan that Osama bin Laden was eventually found by the US Navy SEALs.
Well, I think political memory can be short and selective. So that's what is happening here. But the other aspect was, climate change, where these were the two issues he focused on, basically calling climate change the biggest con that the world has known, and also condemning renewable energy as a hoax, which is forcing the economies of the Western world to spend more and thereby making them uncompetitive. Uh,
Yes.
Again, it's an issue which the whole world confronts. We have temperatures of over 41, 42 degrees in Europe in summer. You have wildfires in the US with temperatures rising. In India, we are seeing an increase of maximum temperatures quite often by 2 or 3 degrees. So these are all very significant shifts which are taking place.
Yes.
And of course, the other aspect is, at least in India, that the cost of renewable energy plus storage is now cheaper than the cost of putting up a new thermal plant, cheaper
Yes.
than putting up a gas fuel plant, and therefore, beyond the climate rationale for renewable energy, there is a
Yes.
strong economic case in countries like India for renewable energy, because
There
it will
is.
also reduce our vulnerability to energy imports from outside. And of
Exactly.
course, finally, going back to Russia and to Ukraine, President Trump equates China and India. I think again it's something which is worth recalling that the previous US administration actually green lighted the energy imports by India from Russia with a view to stabilizing global oil
Stabilize the.
prices.
Yes.
Yes, at a time when they were rising, and also that Europe last year imported more from Russia than India did. And China
Well,
was
Absolutely.
the largest
That
importer,
that
and the
is where
US,
the
no, no,
hypocrisy
may I
lies.
just add,
Yes.
the US also bought uranium hexafluoride and palladium, chemicals
Yes.
and fertilizers from Russia, not in huge amounts, but US
Yes.
experts said they have a constraint, there's a compulsion because they don't have this. Well, countries like India don't have energy. Again, double
Yes.
standards, if you will, in terms of how you judge. And also, while
Yes.
pussyfooting around China, while also avoiding new sanctions on Russia,
On
you
Russia,
pick a
singling out
manageable
India.
target. No,
Absolutely.
no,
I
you
think
pick
it's
a more
staggering
manageable
hypocrisy.
target.
Absolutely, ma'am. Thank you so much for putting all of those issues into perspective for our American guests. And we have to remind ourselves and our viewers here that what we've witnessed over the last few months is nothing but staggering American hypocrisy, singling out India for punitive tariffs for purchase of Russian oil, despite the fact that China is the largest buyer of Russian oil in the world and Europe is the largest buyer of Russian gas in the world. No new sanctions have been imposed on Russia, and India gets picked on. Okay, let me now go back to Brad Bannon and Don Ritter. I want to put this question to both of you, starting with you, Brad. Let's talk about two issues here. Immigration, which is a very important theme of President Trump's speech at the UNGA. Ambassador Meera Shankar says that while this is a very emotive issue around the world, especially in Europe and the United States today, the fact of the matter is the manner in which it is repeatedly referred to by somebody like Donald Trump, it certainly smacks of racism, Islamophobia, the fact that Indians, brown people from India, are now being targeted with the new H-1B visa regime. The kind of statements that we hear constantly about Muslims coming into the US. There is Islamophobia there. There is xenophobia there. There is racism there. And the bizarre claim that the US under his leadership is entering a golden age. Life for Americans has never been better. Inflation has been defeated. I mean, one wonders which Americans Donald Trump has been talking to.
Well, first of all, I think the president, if you go back to 2015 and the day that he announced his presidency in 2000, candidacy for presidency in 2015, his speech about getting into the presidential race, he started the speech by insulting Mexicans, calling them drug dealers. Now there are some Mexicans who are drug dealers. There are some Americans who are drug dealers, but not all of them are. And Donald Trump's presidency has been based on racial hatred. He makes constant references to the bad character of Muslims and Mexicans. And again, I think the president has forgotten an important lesson in American history, that this is a nation of immigrants. Also, I think it's interesting that when he calls climate change and global warming a great con, this is a man who's been convicted of 34 felonies by a jury of his peers. And so every time he uses the word con, I get a kick out of it because he's been convicted of 34 counts of felonies. And again, I think Donald Trump, we live in a dangerous world, and Donald Trump is creating a situation in a dangerous world where America is going to have no friends to help it. And he's also insulting large numbers of the American population. And I think it's interesting. I just saw a national survey of the American public that came out, and only 30% of Americans think he's honest and trustworthy. 55% didn't think he was honest and trustworthy. And maybe because he's a convicted felon, I don't know. But Americans don't buy what the kind of rhetoric that he indulged in yesterday at the United Nations. And again, I'd ask why he promised to end the Ukraine-Russian war in 24 hours. It's been 8 months now, and if anything, it's got worse. And partly the reason it's got worse is Donald Trump has significantly cut American military spending in aid to Ukraine, which has allowed the Russians to make major gains. The Russians aren't going to be satisfied with the Ukraine. Once they conquer Ukraine, if they do, unless the president develops some backbone, he's going to go for Poland next. The Russians are already overflying drones in Poland, Romania, Latvia, and there's going to be a wider war in Europe unless Donald Trump shows some backbone against his buddy Putin. And that would really change the character of Europe when it's occupied by Russian stormtroops.
Okay, and there are many critics who are now asking, for a man hankering so much after a Nobel Peace Prize, is Trump ending wars or is he prolonging wars, making existing ones far worse? And, on the issue of, his criticism of India funding the Ukraine war, we need to remind ourselves, as was pointed out very aptly by Ambassador Meera Shankar earlier, that not only has Donald Trump in his hypocrisy spared China and the European Union any sanctions for being the largest buyers of Russian oil and energy in the world, respectively. He's spared his friend, as Brad puts it, Vladimir Putin, fresh sanctions, and the United States, we know, continues to import chemicals and fertilizers from Russia, and it is the Russian President Vladimir Putin who's on record as having said in a joint press briefing with Donald Trump during the Alaska summit that since Donald Trump took office in January this year, Russia-US trade has gone up by 20%. Talk about hypocrisy. But I want to go back to Don Ritter on these other two issues. Don, you heard what Ambassador Meera Shankar and Brad Bannon said. Brad says that Donald Trump is a convicted felon, whether his supporters like it or not. And every time he uses the word con, Brad is reminded that Donald Trump is a con artist himself. Those are not my words. Those are words of Donald Trump's critics. On the issue of immigration, both Brad Bannon and Ambassador Meera Shankar are pointing out how he keeps sort of hyping up this hysteria and in the process is further fueling Islamophobia and racism. And we've seen how scores of people are bearing the brunt of it in the United States, including people of Indian nationality. And, this claim that Americans have never had a better life and, America is entering a golden age under his leadership. I mean, does he know what's really going on in the life of an average American vis-a-vis the cost of living? He says inflation has been defeated. It's almost as if Donald Trump lives in a parallel universe.
It's hard to know where to start when you have three opponents who are all convinced as to one side of the story.
I'm asking questions, Don.
You're not a moderator. I'm sorry. So the bottom line is the indictments against Donald Trump have largely been thrown out because they were what we call lawfare on the part of the DOJ of the Biden administration. That whole thing was phony as a $3 bill, and the American people didn't buy it. They didn't buy it, and that's why they elected him. And Donald Trump got more Hispanic votes and more Black votes than any other president in recent history. I think going back to George W. Bush. But the bottom line is, you guys are talking about immigration, but it's illegal immigration. 8 to 12 million people have crossed the border during the Biden administration illegally, including members of cartels and human traffickers and drug dealers, along with good people looking for jobs. But that's the bottom line. And now we're simply trying to ferret them out in any way possible. In terms of getting back to India, China already had 50% tariffs on its exports to the United States. India did not. Now, India
It's
is,
all on
if you
hold.
look, no,
It was
let me finish
30% and it's on
at
hold.
least
It's on hold. It's
statement.
not been executed.
Okay. I'm going to hang up because the moderator is
Sir, Sir,
putting her
no, I'm
thumb on
sorry.
the
I'm sorry,
squeeze.
but you cannot play with facts. There is
Europe
a
has
tariff
reduced it.
truce. There is a
Europe has
tariff truce
restricted
between the United States and China currently.
No, no.
the
I
status
think what
quo between the
John
United
is
States
saying
and
is
China
correct.
is that
No, no.
China
May
is
I?
paying 50% tariffs. And you
Yes.
people refuse to acknowledge illegal immigration, mass migration, cultural shifts across borders. I mean, oh my God, what are you talking about? These are what the people in the universities have said for years, and they have been denied in the last presidential election. And frankly, Donald Trump's speech to the United Nations was telling truth to power to a bunch of lazy bureaucrats who haven't earned their super high salaries and perks for decades. Climate change. If you look at the basic science of climate change, CO2 is actually good for the planet. It's not a pollutant, and we are about to take CO2 out of that uh, definition in the regulatory sphere of being a pollutant, and that will change a lot of things. And India burns coal. India is the second top coal burning country in the world. And if you talk about windmills and solar panels supplying India with its vast need of energy, with its billion people plus population, you got to be kidding yourself. I mean, and China is the world's China burns more coal than the rest of the world combined. And what Trump was saying is if between India and China, the CO2 emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions are such that it completely dwarfs the reductions that Europe faces. And Europe has denuded its industrial base by denying fossil fuels that they had in their own backyards. I mean, I don't know where you guys are coming from, but it's not real.
What is not real really is some of those arguments that are being made, because to compare a developing country like India with a developed Western world that has had its glory years and exploited all sorts of norms for decades and centuries. Ambassador Meera
Okay, I'm
Shankar, come
going
in
to
here.
interrupt
Is
you.
it
I'm
even
going to
fair?
interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you.
I
India,
thought you were
India,
okay.
India can get its oil and gas and petroleum products on the world market. They don't have to supply Russia with tens of billions of dollars to conduct a war against the Ukrainian period. And
Well,
by the way,
firstly, India insists.
I agree with Brad on Ukraine. Trump has been wishy-washy, although yesterday he turned on the dime and talked about winning the war and reclaiming all the territory and selling all the weapons. So I don't know what's going on there, to be honest with you. But Brad is right on Trump's position on Ukraine. It's been horrible.
Why
Okay,
did he
and yes,
promise to end the
that is
war
a
in
flip flop that
24
has
hours?
surprised many. From saying that Zelensky must be willing to make compromises, he's now saying that Ukraine can actually win back all that lost territory, and that Russia is a paper tiger. We don't really know where Trump is coming from. But Ambassador Meera Shankar, coming here, the repeated criticism of India's purchases of Russian oil, or even accusing developing countries like India of having a larger carbon footprint than the developed world. The developed world, of course, conveniently completely ignores, how
But you
they're
can buy your oil
industrialized,
on the
how
world
they're
market.
light years ahead of us, and how they have had an unimaginable carbon footprint for decades together now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not blaming
Oh,
India because I don't believe that the carbon footprint is a real threat to civilization. I think decarbonization and deindustrialization due to decarbonization is the far bigger threat to Western civilization, really to the world itself.
okay.
May I
Ambassador Shankar.
also add? Well, may I also add that for Europe, actually, the economic decline began with the severance of their energy linkages with Russia because of the Ukraine war, when energy prices suddenly shot up and the governments had to actually subsidize the consumers or subsidize the producers because there was such a shock to the economy. And then they bought more expensive Norwegian or US oil. And many of them are still facing the consequences of it. That's a choice they have made because they are very
But
close to where Russia has actually engaged in military conflict to Ukraine. So that's a choice they have made. So it's not entirely the green agenda, which you could say has put Europe back. On the other hand, there are people who say that the technologies of tomorrow are going to be dominated by green technologies, whether it's electric cars, whether it's renewable energy, whether it is other technologies. And there, China has invested huge amounts, brought economies of scale to their manufacturing, and led to very great price reductions in these technologies, and that they will leave the US far behind. So
yes,
there
they
are
already do. They
there are
already do. But
so
they
there are two
they use green
implications of
technology to build their market so they can sell this product to the rest of the world. But bottom line is they've got 35 nuclear plants underway. They build 2 new coal-fired plants every week. I mean, they are geared to the new AI economy in terms of energy richness. And not so much we anymore, but Western
Okay.
Europe under Angela Merkel and others, well before the Ukraine war, ambassador, denuded itself under this idea that they could be holier than thou and go green when CO2 is not a pollutant. Oh, it's sad
Okay.
actually.
Let me
You know,
say
well,
I
that
no,
also
it
feel
is
our
may I
friends
scientifically
in the
wrong to
US
believe
need
that
to make up their
CO2 is a
mind
threat
about
to
whether
civilization.
climate change is real or a hoax, and then they can decide whether to blame countries like India or not. Okay, very quickly, Ambassador Shankar, because I need to move on to another topic.
Well, no, I was just saying that, you can tell that to children in Delhi who suffer from asthma because
Yes.
of the terrible levels of pollution. But, we are still amongst the countries which has actually met its 2030 obligations under the Paris Agreement. And we
Yes.
have a fairly ambitious green energy target. And for India, because we have plenty of sun, we don't have a shortage of sun. Solar thermal, solar itself, rooftop solar with storage, hydrogen storage, pump storage, or battery storage
Yes.
is today the tariff today in competitive bidding, the last round of competitive bidding, has been
Yes.
much less than the tariffs for a new thermal power plant. So the economic rationale doesn't exist. Yes, there is a need for grid stability, and I think nuclear can provide that.
Okay.
In
And the
terms of grid
country, let's
stability.
also remind ourselves, the country that pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord was not India. It was the United States of America under Donald Trump. Okay, gentlemen and Madam Ambassador, as we wrap up this conversation, I can't not talk about the one story that's emerged from this entire UN General Assembly saga that has made global headlines for the most bizarre reasons. The broken escalator and teleprompter that's got everyone talking. What's going on there, Brad? MAGA supporters are saying, look, it was possibly even an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Secret Service is looking into it. Donald Trump says it was a deliberate act of sabotage because the UN wanted to humiliate me. What is going on?
Well, first of all, let me say that most Americans don't believe that Donald Trump is honest. And maybe it's because he's convicted of 34 counts of felony. I don't know, but the world shouldn't believe him either. They shouldn't believe anything he says about climate change. He shouldn't believe anything that he says about immigration. He shouldn't believe anything about. They shouldn't believe anything he says about ending wars because he has done more with his buddy Vladimir Putin to continue the Ukrainian war than anybody. He's sharply cut back American military aid to Ukraine, which has allowed the Russians to continue their offensive. And the reality is no one should believe him. Most Americans don't believe him. But what concerns me most is we live in a very dangerous world. And Donald Trump's speech at the United Nations means that we have less friends across the world to help us when things get real hot.
Okay, America is increasingly isolated today and left with fewer and fewer friends. But Don,
America's
really,
relation
but the
European
escalator. I really want to
never
talk about the broken escalator and the broken teleprompter. Team Trump seems to think this was sabotage. There is an investigation that's been ordered by the White House. Secret Service is looking into it. Some MAGA supporters are even calling it attempted assassination. But do you know what the UN has said? UN staff say it was President Trump's own team that was responsible for causing the glitches. And glitches, that's all it was. Why is this such a big deal?
I don't pretend to know, but
Actually, that
almost
question
everything.
was for Don. That question was for Don. Don, please go ahead.
I think the whole thing is funny. I think it's lightheaded in a surrounded by heavy, really loaded issues that are existential and what have you. But it adds a bit of humor, I think, to the whole issue. This is my opinion.
Okay. Good to know that at least you are not one of those conspiracy theorists who believes that this was sabotage or possibly even an assassination attempt. But Ambassador Shankar, as we wrap up, it's bizarre that out of all the important global issues and crises that were discussed during the UN General Assembly, including brought up by President Trump, the one story that's made global headlines is what is now being called Escalator Gate. What did you make of it?
Well, I would say that the world loves a bit of gossip, and it always trumps policy discussions, and that's what you're seeing here. But at a more serious level, I think the fact that the US is in many ways withdrawing from international agreements, international systems, institutions, the WHO, the UN Human Rights Commission, UNICEF, the Climate Change Agreement, and it's reduced its funding to the UN quite dramatically, so that the UN now faces a budgetary shortfall of $500 million. I think they've cut back by $1 billion their support to the UN. I think it's a matter of concern to a country like India, because you see countries like China are going to step in. They are increasing their funding. And that will mean that they will influence and shape the way the international system functions. If the US wants to have the international system function in a better way, they need to be engaged in the system and in seeing how they can bring about efficiencies, greater efficacy. Of course, India has for long been arguing that you need to reform the Security Council of the UN and induct more permanent members. But, leaving that aside, I'm just raising the larger issue that do you actually shape international organizations by withdrawing from them, reducing your budget, and basically saying that they are irrelevant? Or do you shape them to your so a seat for countries that need international, you major walk away.
Absolutely. You cannot for me. You need how UN need to the United go and Don. I did you have yours and it's burden that both in the world can to that with Donald. Okay.
Okay. Is the latter with the has never the Europeans come in these supportive not for Ukraine, but by our United States institutions, there become dry, which is
it's not believe solution. I guess we can completely out of Shankar on global.
Thank you.
Now we have thanks for